Our next presentation is Mr. Richard Ross. The presentation is titled The Right Kind of Lazy. Rich is known for his skeptical reef-keeping article series, his groundbreaking work with cephalopod husbandry, his entertaining and informative talks, and for managing the ambitious 212,000-gallon reef tank in the Steinhart Aquarium in the California Academy of Sciences. I present to you Mr. Rich Ross.
Thank you. Thanks for that nice introduction.
Yes,
thank you. Good morning, everyone. So that's me. My name's Richard Ross. That's my wife. She's an ice skater now. That's my daughter. She was really hungry. Now she rides horses, and we take Halloween very seriously in our house. And I do the skeptical reef keeping, but he talked about that. I work currently at the California Academy of Sciences in the Steinhart Aquarium, where we do the 212,000-gallon reef tank that is now starting to actually look like a reef tank. So a big tank like this is crazy to make happen, and corals are starting to hold, and I would expect in the next year or two it'll start to really look like something fantastic. There's 5 windows, actually 6 viewing areas. They're made after different dive sites in the Philippine area of Anilao, and this is going to be the main SPS window. But we also have a top-down public view, so you can see the entire top of the tank from the public, and we've started really working on growing SPS there, so you get that view that you normally don't get unless you do a behind-the-scenes tour. We also at work do all kinds of stuff, and we have a new initiative in conjunction with the Nature Conservancy and Sea Corps International. And I was just in the field for a couple weeks doing some coral spawning work and some reef rehabilitation, so I thought I'd just take a minute and tell you guys about it, because there's a lot of terrible stories about what's going on with the reefs, but there's some good stuff in this one that I thought I'd take a minute to share. In the Caribbean and the Atlantic, there's 2 stony corals that we really care about, 2 reef-building corals, or branching corals, the elkhorn and the staghorn. This is palmata. And we went on just a snorkel to a reserve, and I saw something I'd never seen before, because they say that between 90 and 95% of coral cover in the Caribbean is gone in the last 30 or 40 years, right? 90 to 95%. That's an insane number, and we can nod our heads and have an idea what that feels like. But this is what I got to see that I'd never seen before. This is a full-on coral graveyard. And you can see up in the back corner, let's see if this works. Do you guys see this mouse? Just for fun, there, do you see that on the screen? So there's some snorkelers, right? So this is a massive thing, and they take you out there and they show it to you, and they give you all the lecture about not touching the corals, but this is what it looks like. Just acres of this palmata, and you can see how huge that is. Just gigantic stuff, all dead. But that's why we do the restoration work and the spawning work. So what we do is we find some healthy corals, we scope them out, and then we look on the night of the spawn, about the 4th day after the full moon, we look for this. And those kind of white pinkish spots are the egg sperm bundles getting ready to be released by the coral in one of the mass spawning events that we all would talk about. And then what we do when we see that, it's called setting. We tent the coral, and that's what it looks like. And then the gametes come out and they float. So they're positively buoyant, so they go up into the net where we get to collect them in a collection tube. So that's pretty cool. And then we take them back to the lab and we mix them together. We're basically doing a big soup, but I'll get to that in a second. And the spawning was incredible. That's all gametes in the water. There's also usually a big plankton bloom at the same time, but not this time, not in this shot. The next shot's a really interesting shot because it's not wild coral at all. The reef, not this shot, the one after that, is TNC collects what are called fragments of opportunity. So these corals were grown for frags that were going to die for one reason or the other. They were planted 5 years ago, and they grew up into these colonies, and they spawned huge, which is a huge deal. Now, the asexual reproduction, the fragmentation that we do at home and that a lot of people do for reef restoration is nice, but with 95% of corals gone, it's just not enough to rehab reefs. So what we do is we collect the spawn and we take it to the lab and we let it fertilize, and then you get swimming coral larvae. Did you guys know that coral, when they're larvae, they swim? Which is kind of an insane thing to think about. So they swim around for 4 or 5 days, and then they look for a place to settle down. So here you go, you can see the coral swimming around, and one just jets out. I just like that it goes so quickly. Once they find a place to settle down, they settle down, and you can see how small they are. That's a single polyp of Acropora palmata, and you can see it in relationship to that penny there, how big it is. It's very small. What we do is we get all that spawn together, and we throw it in these pools, and we get them to settle on these what we call tetrapods. And then we want to be able to throw millions of those out into the water and let those grow up. And that's pretty cool. They lock into place, and you can't see them very quickly. And if we can do millions of those, perhaps we can get hundreds of thousands of corals growing and actually make an impact on what's going on. We've given them the initial setting place, which is a bottleneck. So the next 4 or 5 years are going to be really interesting as this work progresses and we get better at that. Thank you for letting me take that little trip to the side. At my house, I've got this, a secret home lab, where I do work with octopuses. And whenever I can, I feed clownfish to Dr. Seuss fish. Oh, I love that video so much, more than anything. These are culled clownfish. These are clownfish that are going to get destroyed anyway from a local breeder who doesn't want them. I think this is the best thing to do. Why are we taking damsels off the reef to feed to predator fish? Let's figure out a good way to use these clownfish. I can't stop watching it either. It's just, it's like Bambi, but better. This, let's see what we got here. This is my home reef tank. We're going to talk today about how I run it and why, given the way I run it, I'm sorry, this is what it looks like right now. I was gone for 2 weeks, and I came home, and it looked like this. I didn't freak out at all while I was gone 2 weeks. I'm going to tell you why I didn't freak out, and I'm going to tell you, we're going to talk about why, given the parameters that this tank runs at, never mind the lazy methodology, why this tank doesn't look like this tank. Because according to common wisdom in the reef hobby, it should look like that because my phosphates sometimes hit 3. Not 0.3, not 0.03, 3. So how does laziness fit into the question? It seems like you couldn't be lazy and avoid that. But the kind of laziness we're talking about is not Homer Simpson kind of lazy. It's not just not doing things. It's planned laziness, right? So sometimes efficiency, right? Why? I love that. Why should you take it out? It's laziness that makes your life better, that you plan to make your life better. And of course, one person's lazy is what somebody else calls ingenuity. And I think that's a good metaphor for reef keeping. We want to figure out things that replace us having to do stuff. At least this is what I think, but it's my talk, so I get to say it like everyone thinks what I think. A little bit of background on my system so you know what's going on. This is my reef tank as it was in 2003. You can see it's got the height of reef fashion, which is the cherry wood maple canopy and stand. And this is canopies were a good example, really, of the right kind of lazy and the wrong kind of lazy, right? You get the canopy so you can put stuff in there and not look at it. That's great, because then you're not seeing a mess. But everyone makes the top of their canopy look like that with a whole bunch of extra crap they have nowhere else to put. And then you put some ferns up there and pretend that it looks nice. It doesn't, it never did. It was just a lie. Knowing that, we broke the tank down briefly because we were putting a new floor in the room. And yeah, we put in a new wood floor, which seems like a really stupid thing to do under a reef tank. But given the price of wood floors, just go for it. When you move, you're going to redo the floors anyway, so who cares? So I put the lighting armature in place so everything would hang from the ceiling to make my life easier. And we put in the wood floor, and then we built these soffits to help hide everything. And that's what it ended up looking like when you're done, although I sealed that light leak a whole lot better. That main door is a really important part to being lazy because what I couldn't stand on the canopy was having 11-inch space to get into the top of the tank. And I also hated not being able to get into the back of the tank. So if you look at this picture, you can see the wood-colored door is where the bathroom door was. There's a bathroom in there. And the white door is the door I put in. And so the wood-colored door is behind the tank. So that big door in front of the tank opens up. It's a big 2-foot door. You can reach in, you can grab everything. You can have, again, the height of reef keeping fashion, a 10-port lock line manifold covered in salt creep, and then you can close the door and it goes away. And this is all good because I am lazy. Also, under the house, I have a 40-inch crawl space, so I decided to put everything under there. Why have anything in the house if you can avoid it? If anything leaks, it's under the house. If it's noisy, it's under the house. I pretended like there's a 180-gallon sump and then a 50-gallon sump. And I pretended I was going to go under there and frag corals and grow corals and farm them, which I did for a while. And then I realized I was too lazy to go into a crawl space. I didn't want to do that. And like I say, the good thing about the crawl space is it's easy to clean if you ever clean it. I cleaned it for this picture. I usually don't because I'm lazy. But what you do is you close the door and it goes away, and that's good because I am lazy. All of this stuff was behind the tank, so all the timers and things like that. Again, you can close the door and it goes away. This is one of the original lazy devices up at the top there. It's a DJ plug panel. You plug all your plugs into there, and then instead of unplugging pumps, you just flip the switch. Fantastic. That is the right kind of lazy. We're going to move away from those today. Super easy. You're lazy. This is the door. If you sit on the toilet, it kind of looks like that if the door's open. I don't know why anyone would do that. I certainly never do. And again, you close the door and it goes away. And all this stuff is a means to an end for me. All of the support for a tank is the means to an end. I know some people really love the OCD joy of making everything perfect on the outside of their tank, and that's fine. That's not my thing. For me, it's a means to an end. What I care about is this stuff. I want to look at the animals. I want to spend time with the animals. I want to see what they're doing. I want to occasionally clean algae. I don't want to do it that much, but that's the goal for me. The goal for me is not to spend a lot of time on my equipment. So that's what I'm looking for. I had 4 metal halide lamps, 4 250s in a custom Luminarc. And I had a chiller outside, and the problem with that, right, because if you have a chiller, why would you put it inside? Because you're just blowing heat that you then have to cool your water with. So if you have the ability to put the chiller outside, it's great. But it's using energy, and then I had to maintain it, and I don't want to do that. And where I live, you get about 4 weeks a year, randomly, in the last part of the summer, where the temperature gets really hot. And the tank would get up to 85 sometimes, and that was worrisome, and I didn't like that and made me very nervous. So I got an Apex, and the only reason I got a controller was to have the lights turn off when they got too hot. And that's all I wanted to use it for. I'm very into having things distributed. I don't want all my eggs in one basket. There's 5 circuits going to the tank, and they all have different pumps on it. If the main return goes out like it did last night, which I'll tell you about, I think, later on, there's enough pumps in the tank to keep everything going. So there's not one single point of failure at all. But slowly I put other things on it. I put a cooling fan, which vents the space behind the tank. I put a backup heater. I put the WXM module to run the vortex. Pretty cool, not critical, because I am a lazy. And that made it very nice to be able to control everything from one place. And then everything changed. I killed my tank. I killed all the SPS, 95, I like people walking out turn when he killed the tank. What did you do? This is the 3rd time I've killed my tank. I think killing your tank is okay. It's not optimal, clearly it's suboptimal, but it's okay as long as you do it a different way every time, right? If you kill your tank the same way, you're doing something wrong. You're not learning the lessons you need to. So I killed it twice with caulk, 2 different ways. That can't happen anymore. This was due to the single biggest point of failure in any system that we run, the Aquarist. So this was all my fault. I made a late night stupid decision. For some reason I thought I had a water test that showed a little ammonia, and I thought I'm going to add Amquil to the tank because, hey, it's reef safe. What am I... So 11:30, when it's 11:30 and you think, I'm going to do something, don't. Don't do anything. Just watch your tank wake up in the morning and see what you did. So the next morning, that's what I came into. We're not sure why this happens. Amquil crashes pH. It can do other things too. It's a proprietary product, so it's really hard to get real information on it. I wouldn't use it with corals for anything anymore. I would maybe use it you can chloramine your water with it and then off-gas it, and you're probably okay. But anyway, who cares, right? So what did I do now? LEDs have proven themselves by this. This was like 2 years ago, the week after MACNA, so that's awesome. But I wasn't going to change to metal halides because I'm lazy, and because why would you do that to a thriving reef tank? There's no reason to. But now there's no SBS. Great time to do a lot of changes. So I pulled out the 10-port lockline manifold, I got rid of the halides, and I put in radions. I like them very much. And then I got some gyres. And I realized all this could be run on the apex. And I realized that when I was up in Washington talking to this guy, Dwayne, who's fantastic. And he knows everything about apex and basically would write the code for me. I would say, Dwayne, how do I make this pump turn on and off 5 times a day and ramp up and ramp down each time? And he would go, use this code. And then I went, where do I put that code? And he said, why don't you just give me access to your apex? Okay, I'm king lazy. So my dashboard went from looking like this to looking like this pretty quickly because I am king lazy. And I'll tell you how lazy I am. I got a breakout box, which you can put on a magnetic switch, which will turn off and on anything. Now when I open this door, the work light comes on in the crawl space. I am literally too lazy to turn a switch. This is my Skimmate bucket right here. You see it down in the corner? Oh, not in the corner. Oh, I can do this again. So skimmers can go nuts, and they can drain your tank. I don't know if anybody's done this. It's happened to me in the past. I decided to collect the Skimmate for a couple of reasons. One, so I'd know how much Skimmate's actually coming out of the tank. 2, so I don't have to clean the cup as often because I'm lazy. And 3, there's a float switch on here that turns off the skimmer when it pulls out 5 gallons of Skimmate. And I used to have to walk down 5 stairs and go under the house and open the door and flip a switch. I don't want to do that anymore. So the Apex now, I get an email when that float switch is triggered, and then I press a button and it drains. But that's not good enough for me, because if you press a button, if I'm on the road or I'm on vacation, I go in the field a lot like I talked about before, you press the button, you're just hoping it works, right? You have no actual confirmation that it drained. Enter the Webcam. This is my new one. I recommend this thing greatly. It's 99 bucks. It's super easy to set up. It's pan, tilt, zoom. I'll show you some footage from it in just a second. Super fantastic. I've got 2 extra ones at home I need to set up. So now this is a video of what happens after I get the text on my phone that my Skimmate has filled up. But I also can get to decide, do I want to drain it or not? What's going on with my salinity? How much Skimmate has been produced? Is this happening twice a day? Because that's too much. So I get to troubleshoot and plan what's going on. I get that instant feedback. Also, I want to point out with the Skimmate bucket, before I had the Webcam in the Apex, I would have to actually go downstairs and look to see if the bucket was full. And sometimes I don't get down there for a week, right? And that's another reason I'm lazy, is because I'm not like this at work. Things at work are clean and crisp and beautiful and looked at 10 times a day. When you get home, it does get trying to do the same thing you've been doing all day at work at home as well. So that's a part of why this all started and why the whole phosphate thing started, which we'll get to in just a second. So here's the video. I've confirmed. I press C. I go back, and this Skimmate goes away. Yay. And then I can turn off, and then I can watch and make sure in 30 seconds the light will also turn off, and then I can go back to what I'm doing in the field or enjoying whatever I am with my daughter and my wife, and feel proud that I am the right kind of lazy. I'm also tired of lugging salt mix around, and I'm lucky enough that this guy, Sea Pure, this is Bob, he collects water and he filters it and he'll bring it to my house. So every once in a while I get 400 gallons of salt water, and he pumps it into these tanks, and then I use the Apex right now I'm doing a regular automated water change. It did bring my phosphate down a little. Hey Craig, how you doing? Craig's got a frag in that pram right there. And oddly enough, it's sexual reproduction, not asexual. So it's not really a frag, it's a spat. Yeah, the frag, you tried the frag thing for a long time and it didn't work out? Not enough genetic diversity? So I'm doing these water changes now. It did bring the phosphate down some, and I have a graph in a minute, you'll see that, but I'm not sure if it's enough to really make a difference. And now I'm kind of doing it. It's about 20 liters a day, which I don't know. Now it's being done by habit. But what's great about the monitoring is I can look at my controller's dashboard, and I can see and this happens a lot as water is pumped out of the tank and the ATO doesn't keep up from the skimmate. If my salinity starts to come down, I can raise it by adding more water to the tank above the normal running line and letting it evaporate down. So how do I do that? I do it like this. I've got a salt fill button, and this I would absolutely not do without a webcam, because if that sticks and it just keeps pumping, you're in trouble. Although, are you? Not if you're the right kind of lazy. That pump is also hooked up to a float switch, which is about 3 inches up from the water line. So it can only put in that much water. So if the apex borks and that thing keeps pumping, it can only put in about 40 gallons of water into about 500-gallon total system. So, and again, so I've set it up now. You flip the switch and you'll look on the screen and you can see on the right side above that water is moving. Some more water will start pumping in just a second. There you go. So I can actually visualize how much water I'm putting in. So I can be sitting on an island in the middle of the Caribbean, pressing buttons and watching my tank fill up or not. It's incredibly helpful for peace of mind, and it also makes you king lazy. What does that say? I'm not lazy enough. Okay, I said that already. So this is my Apex dashboard. It's got a lot on it. And you can see up there, I'm now tracking alkalinity. So I got, last year, I was able to get a prototype from Jim Welsh of one of his alkalinity monitors. And this thing's been running bulletproof pretty much for about a year. And I think alkalinity may be, now that we can monitor it over time, or soon everyone will be able to monitor it over time with the new product from, at least on your Apex. There's a couple new products, but I like the one that's coming out from these guys because it integrates with everything I already do. I think that may be the single most important parameter with SPS, and you can really watch it change and move up and down. And you can adjust things on the fly. So if I'm looking here and my alkalinity is going high, I can do two things. I can come here to my caulk dosing, and I can change it and lower the amount of caulk that's being dosed, which will result in less alkalinity. I can also come over to here, which is my calcium reactor, and I can raise the set point from 6.5 to 6.7. So it will be dissolving less media. So I can control that on the fly, which is nice. I almost feel like it's good enough to be able to actually run your calcium reactor with that. You set a certain number of parameters. There's a whole bunch of safety stuff you need to put in there, but I'm going to wait to do that until there's a production model that's been working over time. But being able to control the alkalinity has been fantastic, and I really do see a difference in coral health as it goes down and as it goes up. It's also very interesting to see that it'll be running perfectly for 3 or 4 weeks, not having to touch anything, and all of a sudden the alkalinity will start to drop rapidly. And so I'll have to be bumping it up. And clearly, that's from the corals being comfortable enough and stable enough to start using it up to grow. So in the past, I would miss that need for demand change because I'm not going to drop. I don't see color anyway, so I'm not doing those tests anyway. I have to beg my daughter to do any kind of titration test. But now I can see it happening in real time and take advantage of it and make sure the corals get what they want and they grow faster. That's the monitor. That's not what they're going to look like, but pretty amazing that Jim made these and they worked. This one has been working for over a year now. Of course, the camera, so you can see everything that happens, and you can see I didn't clean up anything for this picture because why? Why? This is under the house. I don't look at it. I don't know why I'd want to spend much time cleaning up my skimmer. It's just not something that brings me joy. I'd rather look at the tank. This is the other side. I can visualize that that the CO2 is dosing. I can visualize that the dose pumps are pumping. And I think I've got, yeah, here we go. This is a great video of how this camera works. Oh, I'm king lazy. That joke's over. Let's see. There we go. So the camera, it's got these set points. So I've got these zones that I can just tell it to go look at. So that's kind of looking at everything. You can see the skimmer is running. I can see the skimmer pump is running and where it's running. I can see if the skimmate bucket is full. I can zoom in here, and this is an important one that used to kill me. I can visualize that the calcium reactor is actually dripping right here. So how many times have you guys been gone and come home to find that your calcium reactor is plugged up and it hasn't been dosing for a few days? I check it every once in a while. I could actually put in a switch there, I realized. So it's great. I can see everything that's going on, and of course I'm king lazy. So Last night, I get a thing from the apex, something's wrong, so I have to track down what's wrong. You might have seen me in the corner last night going, leave me alone, as people come to show me little tiny bead things of private parts with LEDs on them. It was very weird that people bring that to me. And I want to, this is what I'm usually doing. This is in the field, this is how we drink beer. We clean those first. So I get emails that are a problem, so I check the camera, and the skimmer's not running. And I think, oh, okay, that's okay. I'm going to be okay for a couple days without the skimmer. I don't need to do anything. But I can hear on the camera that the air pump, the air injector pump, the needle wheel's still running. So I turn that off. Why have that run for no reason, right? So that's great. Then I go check the web camera in the house, which is just a Nest camera, so I have a wide view now. And clearly I wasn't capturing this on video because I was in panic mode. And I see that the gyres are pumping air, which means that the return is off and the water level's down. Now that's okay, it just means like the top inch of stuff is going to be exposed to air, and that's a risk I'm willing to take. So I emailed my wife and daughter and said, hey, when one of you gets home, let me know what's going on. And my wife got home and she was rushing out the door somewhere else, and she realized that one of the GFI switches had popped. So she flips that, and I see the skimmer come back on. I think we're all good. I tell her to go. I just check a little while later because that's what you do, and I can see there's still bubbles in the main tank. So the return is still off. So something worse has happened. I email again, and they tell me that they found out that the electric company had changed our meter yesterday and didn't tell anybody. So that means bad things happened. Everything went off for a while. And the return pump wasn't coming on for some reason. So I get my daughter on the phone this time because my wife's already grumpy with me because I made her do something and she has her own life, which is good. My daughter is pressing the buttons. We can't get it to go back on. So I have her on FaceTime, sitting at the party last night, looking at FaceTime, and she's showing me different things. And the GFIs are all on, and I have her crawl to the back of the house where the return is plugged into a substation. It's a big panel, but we can see if the light's on. And the light is on. It is getting power. The pump's not getting power, and I say, hey, put your hand on that pump. She says, it's not on. Okay, the big yellow switch, flip it, and then flip it back on. She flips it back on. She goes, it's on now. Great, we're all good. Go upstairs. She goes upstairs, everything's running again. She did say the magic words, it smells up here. So that's bad, but it's probably just the top inch being exposed for a few hours. So all of this lazy planning, and it's gonna get better because if my daughter wasn't home, asking my wife to crawl under the house, she'll do it, but I feel bad about it. So I'll extend all that stuff so that's either at the front door of the crawl space or it's behind the tank upstairs so you can flip the switch up there instead because you can see if it comes on or not. All that planning makes troubleshooting easy. I did almost all the work figuring out what was wrong from my phone at a party a couple thousand miles away with a hurricane in between us. And I was able just to tell my daughter what to do, and it took 5 minutes. Boom, up and running. So that kind of lazy stuff, it pays off when you're traveling. People, we're going to talk a little bit about how all this methodology has impacted the tank. This is an average feeding for the tank. Some people tell me that that seems to be a lot of food. And when I feed, it looks like this. And this was like 3 days ago. Seems like a lot of food? Yeah, I think things need to eat. So I think things with mouths need food, and they need lots of it, and some of the studies are coming out and showing that. And so I think it's really, really important to feed. And that's an average size feeding. Sometimes I'll do a lot more. Sometimes I'll add other stuff, some Reef Frenzy or whatever I got laying around. And I like the idea of flood feeding. And when I get a controllable return pump, I will make the return pump go down when I feed to about 10% of the flow so that food stays there in the tank in suspension where things are going to eat it for longer. By the way, I think intake water motion is way, way, way more important than turnover. The idea of turning over through your sump, I think it doesn't matter. You don't need a lot of water going through your sump. In fact, I think you only need as much water going through your sump as your skimmer can process. Anything more than that, it's not, you're short-circuiting, you're not short, what's the opposite of short-circuit? Look at bypass, you're bypassing the water past your skimmer. So I'm much more interested in having water motion in the tank, moving the water around near the corals, than running through some box downstairs. I don't think it does you much good at all. So the minimum flow you get also keeps the food in suspension longer. So what happens with results over time? Most interesting is phosphate. I'll show you a graph or two in a minute. Nitrate's also pretty interesting, and alkalinity is interesting. This was 2012, and it's nice. I have data from 2012 now, all the way through. I just got new results yesterday. This is when I cared about everything. I was doing GFO all the time. I was doing carbon all the time. I was doing big water changes all the time. The phosphate was 0.31, which is still high, right? So I was constantly fighting this. And I got tired of fighting this because I don't want to come home 3 days a week and have to change GFO from my work where I'm changing, I have a super sack of GFO and I'm putting hundreds of pounds into a container all the time. So I kind of stopped doing it. And this is from August 2013. PO4 is up to 1.13. Tank still looks okay. Some people started going, that's really high, Rich. I went, but it looks okay. Why should I change anything? Here we go, January 2014, 1.39. This is from March 2014, 1.8. And this was interesting. I started a thread on Reef Central because I like to hit myself in the head with a hammer. And I called it Guess the Phosphate. And people were like, man, you tank. So I took the top picture and I posted it because that's how I like the tank to look most of the time. And people were like, it's okay. And then a little while later, at the same time I took the other picture, a week later I posted the bottom picture. And we were like, oh my God, your tank's fantastic because it's blue. And then I posted both pictures and they were like, oh, okay, all right. But still, phosphate number 1.8. That seems pretty high. Here we go. Now it starts to get really fun. This is April 2014, phosphate 2.1. Boy, that tank sure looks bad. Corals are sure dying. Look at all the algae. Oh my God, they're so brittle, they're falling apart. No. Up here is a pink tip coral that I would have to get over to frag with 2 hands and bone cutters and really put all my strength into it. That coral's pretty beefy. This is the 7th month, what's that, July in 14, 1.8, it came down a little bit. And this is January, this is the most recent pick I have with a number, 1.58. So it's still running pretty high. It's not up to the high 3 that it used to be running. So on all of these numbers, the tank kind of looked fine. This is 2 days ago, after I was gone for a week, two and a half weeks. I really like coming home to a tank that looks like that after 2.5 weeks than having something go wrong, like the salinity goes down. Salinity creep is a really interesting one because it can get away from you if you're not paying attention, and I really like the monitoring for it. By the way, I don't care what the number actually is. It's 35.5. I know that that's kind of what I'm looking for. I don't believe for a minute that that's the actual salinity. All I'm looking at all these numbers are trending. So I know my relative salinity, I like it when it's 35.5. When it hits 34.6, I want to bring it back up again. If it's at 36, I want to bring it back down again. I have no idea what the actual number is. Don't actually care. I just want to keep it where it seems to be happy. So here's some graphs. Here's a bunch of stuff that no one ever cares about, but we get the numbers for. Magnesium we do kind of care about. And ignore the alkalinity because on this chart it won't say anything. But you can see everything looks pretty okay. We could talk about some of the stuff, but we don't really need to. This is all done, by the way, with aquametic water testing, which is now, which used to be aquarium water testing. I used to try to wonder about, is this testing methodology any good or not? Certainly, I have to assume it's better than me because I don't see color very well. And certainly I would think that because they do it for a living, and this is their job, that they do it the same way every time. That's good enough for me. That gives me relative information. Here's some of the interesting numbers. Here's my nitrate. So you can see at the beginning when I cared, running what people think are respectable numbers, 10, 8, maybe 13, jumped to 39. I got a little scared. I did a bunch of water changes for a couple years, and then I stopped really caring, and it jumped up to 91. And that's a couple of years when it was that high. Didn't make a difference. Nothing mattered. Nothing changed. I did have one time in there where algae took over again, or started to take over, a lot of ulva. And I don't think these numbers have any impact on algae. I think it's having space to grow. At that time as well, it turned out I lost a couple of my main herbivores. Actually, now that I'm saying it out loud, my fox face was eating a clam, so I took him out, and then I started having algae problems. Got new herbivores, algae went away, coral recolonized that area, it's not a problem anymore. Phosphate, here's the exciting graph, right? Those numbers were high to begin with, and then they got what people considered to be insane. But as you saw in the pictures, all the way through that, no problems. I mean, problems, right? Everyone's got problems. There's no not problems. It's reef keeping. You're always having problems. You know, every year I expect to get some of the white death, you know, the rapid tissue necrosis that comes. Now we're trying to, I remember people blaming it on African dust blowing over. It could be, I don't know, it's crazy. But everyone seems to get it. Not enough people talk about it because they don't want to see it. But not everyone gets it. A lot of people get it. This is Joe Waiulo. Joe Waiulo, arguably the best reef tank in the world. He gets it, just happens, right? Brad Seifus, another meticulously kept tank where the parameters are kept in line, like a military prep school. He gets it. Stuff just happens. So what's going on in the tank? Why are these levels okay? Or why is it working? This is Craig Bingman. He's right here. This are words that he told me a few years ago. Different thing are different. Different corals are different. They're adapting to your tank, and you're self-selecting. So the corals that don't do well, and I don't get them again. The corals that do well, do well. We're all doing that in our tanks all the time. There's nothing special going on in my tank. They're just higher levels than most people like. Craig's got a talk this afternoon. I'm sure he'll say something about it given what I understand about his talk, so you can talk to him about it. This little tiny person is Sanjay. You may have heard his name. He looks so much bigger in person. He said, quote, "For the longest time I never used to measure nitrates and phosphates and just go by the tank look and how the corals were doing. When I did measure nitrate, I was very surprised to see they were over 50 and the corals were doing fine. He brought it down to 5 to 10 ppm, didn't see any changes." Right? This is Mitch Carl. He doesn't even know what phosphate is. This is Charles Delbeek, or Delbake. His idea was that my elevated alkalinity, which was running high around 12, 13, I tried to keep it up there for a long time. He thought that the high levels of carbonate was allowing the corals to continue to calcify and grow over time. Interesting idea, but as you can see on the graph, you can see where it's high. This is mill equivalents, I'm sorry. I'm trying to train my brain to think in this scale. But you can see when it was up high in the 4 and 5s, which is in the 12, 13s, and 14s, that's when Charles gave me that quote. Then it came down, probably came down because of the automated water changes. Came down to about half that, but it's still up at 2 and 3. So that's not that elevated. That's around 9 DKH, still getting fine growth. So, you know, I don't know, maybe the elevation only has to be that high. Natural saltwater's around 8 anyway, so I'm not really sure what's going on in this tank. I'm not saying run out and run your tank like a cesspool like I do, with nutrient levels like I do. There are a million ways to skin a reef. Do what works for you. Chasing numbers, however, might be something you might want to consider not doing so much, especially things like pH. You can't do anything about it except add an air source from outside of your tank in your sump. I did that, and my pH went from 8.2 to 8.3.5. But there's nothing else you can do. You can't add a buffer. There's nothing. Don't chase pH. People like to chase pH because it's really easy to test. I think that's also why people like nitrate. We could really easily test for nitrate, and then we thought we could do something about it by doing water changes and whatnot, or taking out your sock filters. We didn't talk about phosphate until we had an easy test for phosphate. And then we really didn't talk about it until 2005 when we had a product that would take it out of our tanks. So now all of a sudden you can do something about it. Now it becomes an issue. It may not be the issue we think it is. Yeah, so I travel and I work and yeah. So that's the tank. I think it's good. I think there's a lot of ways to do it. I think ALK is important. This works for me. You do what works for you. And this is the best metaphor I've come up for being lazy and reef keeping. This is what we're doing. You are constantly trying to stop your tank from burning down. Everything in your tank, your box of water, this is an insane endeavor we are all engaged in. Keeping corals in a box of water in your house. Crazy pants thing to do. It constantly wants to die. There are 1,000,001 things that can go downhill, and you are constantly trying to put out fires. You might as well be comfortable while you're doing it. Thank you very much for your attention, and I want to thank these people. And if you want more information, you can go to that website.